So the whole idea of this started back the beginning of last year, I think it was, and because in 2020 I had a heart attack on the farm, so I had to leave the farm. But not even a heart attack takes your obsession out of, well, not my obsession anyway, out of me. So Tony said, could I, I'm pretty useless at physical work now. So she said, could you do some talks? And so we came up with some different talks for people in the Clough-Jordan area. And the first one I did was about seed saving. So out of the seed saving one, we got a group of people together who are interested in seed saving. So from that, what we've actually done is we've created our own community seed bank. And so this year, all of the guys are involved in it. We'll be growing plants to observe them and see how they go to seed, and then harvest the seed, and then that seed will then go back into our community gene bank, and all of the members of the gene bank will have access to it. And then every year at this time, we'll also have a seed share, because nature is abundant. It's more abundant than we can actually handle. And that was another one of the reasons is I've got my own fridge full of seeds, and it's too full of seeds, and you can't hold on to these things. You've got to let them go. All of the seeds that we have came from somebody originally. And this is an amazing thing to think of. All of the technology that's been used in, all the biotechnology in inserting genetic traits from one thing to another, they haven't been able to develop another vegetable or fruit out of it. The newest vegetable and fruit, I think, is either the cross between kale and broccoli, which is whoopee. We can get that by growing either kale or broccoli. Or they reckon the macadamia nut in Australia is a new, but that's ignoring the fact that the Aboriginals have probably been selecting and planting them for thousands of years anyway. But there was one selection where a woman saw a disease that made the shell thinner. And so that's our new, for all of the trillions and trillions and trillions that would have been spent on biotechnology, that is our thing, our new vegetable or fruit, whatever. The main thing is that the biotechnology, the genetic thing, has been a bit of a disaster, really. They've not really created anything other than GM resistant and BT, which is Bacterium thuringiensis, which is a bacteria that can attack caterpillars, soft worms. That's what the GM thing has been against. And the fact that as farmers and as growers, when we select, we don't select for individual genetic things. So it's farmers that have selected for salt tolerance. It's farmers that have selected for dry tolerance. It's farmers that have selected for wet tolerance, and to be able to fit into any area really where we live on the earth. That's been farmers observing genetic sequences and selecting plants and adding more plants there to bring in more genetic information, then selecting back off of them. So the 16,000 years that we've been involved in this, it's been us together. And that's why I say the seeds don't belong to me. I'm just passing through like we all are. And so if I hold on to those seeds, they will just go dead and they won't grow again. So the whole idea is that we share seeds and we keep them alive and we keep them circulating in our community, and to anybody else who comes into our community who wants the seeds. Because also our seeds that we buy, apart from Seed Savers and brown envelope seeds, all of the seeds coming into the country, they don't come from this climate. I know before the Arab Spring, North Africa was a top place for growing seeds that would be then sold in the UK and Ireland, because they get a drier period when we get the harvest. So you get the seeds are really dry and they're easy. You don't get all of the. We're totally different here. Our seeds that get to expose to fungus as mold and mildew, and that's why is a mad dash when things are going to seed here, because if we leave them out too long with the variability of the jet stream above us, you know, we could end up with that kind of weeks we get that kind of misty, kind of grey, overcast, and then that's when you get the molds and things come in. So, you know, we have to have genetic diversity that deals with all of these problems, but then also we have to learn the skills and how to adapt the skills that we have to save seed. So how's your world going? Is it doing all right? How are you humans kind of being nice to each other and saving the world, are we? If we know there's something wrong, why aren't we doing anything? Because especially in the West, it's not bad enough yet. It's not bad enough.
It's not economical.
You can't eat that. You can't eat money. You can only eat something you get for it, you know. So we see what's happening now with the whole Ukraine thing, and to be quite honest with you, there's someone to blame in government. There's someone whose job it is to look at the world map and go, oh, we're getting all of our fertilizer from Russia. Oh, we should make sure that we shouldn't be doing that. But I think this is, in my lifetime, it's been sponsored by the, you know, the World Bank, the World Banking Organization. This whole thing of globalization. You know, it works great when we had loads of cheap fossil fuels that we sometime in the last year realized was destroying the planet we're on. We've known about these things for a long, long time. It's just that we're happy. And when you keep humans, well, not that we're happy, but, you know, we're fed, we're clothed, we have heat for now. You know, everything's okay, so we're not doing anything. But why we don't do anything, that keeps eroding away in the background. So one of the things that really interested me is sovereignty and security. So I think 100 years ago there was 500 varieties of carrots. Now there's 12 varieties of carrots. And none of them grow very well. Well, they do grow well here, but just for instance, none of them grow very well here. What do we do? Where you have to buy your carrots. But there's still enough genetic material out there of carrots that you could breed into your carrot varieties and then select back out to get something that actually works the way you want it to work. But you don't have any control on this. You don't have any control of what foods that you're really eating. And in fact, even to be able to sell seeds in the EU is illegal, because they have to be distinct, uniform and stable. This is a European law where all seeds are put onto a register. Apparently the original idea was there was too many seeds being sold that weren't what they were supposed to be. In other words, scammers. Well, there's always scammers. There's scammers out there now. And so what they did is we'll homogenize and standardize everything. So like when I'm buying a packet of red Russian kale, I know it's red Russian kale in there. But the thing is, the distinct, uniform and stable means that each variety has to be distinct, each variety has to be uniform, and each variety has to be stable. So it's only going to stay the way it is. It hasn't got any ability really to change. And every year you exert that pressure of selecting something so it's pure, this human thing about purity. What it does is it actually erodes away at the genetic base, the diversity that's held within the chromosomes. So we get something which is homogenized. So it's like now the actual the way that the seed grows and the characteristics of the seed, they're not coming, there's less of them. So with climate change, we have real problems because we need genetic diversity to adapt to the different climate changes. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we're just coming out of a drought in springtime that not many people realize because we're not actually growing much in springtime. You know, but we might have to look for things that are going to grow in springtime, and then look at the grains. Like we've been told so long now we can't grow wheat for bread in Ireland, that we grow barley to feed cattle. We shouldn't be eating rice, and we definitely shouldn't be eating quinoa. You know, these come from different cultures that depend upon this. Our culture had these things, you know. I remember my grandmother and my mother, we always had pearl barley in a stew or whatever. Like, you know, You kind of just go, things go out of fashion because avocados are in, you know, and we know how rotten avocados are. You know, the cartels are involved in it. What makes us is the food that grows in the land, and it just flows through into us. So we are the land that we come from. So that's why we need to really be looking at what it is that we're eating. We know that things are going to get a bit gnarly now because we've depended upon just like we depended upon the fossil fuels, we've depended upon a technique for extracting nitrogen out of the atmosphere using fossil fuels. We shouldn't be burning fossil fuels. There's 80% of nitrogen in the air. Oh, okay, it's N3, I think it is, and the plant needs N2. But that's why you have the soil biology. They take that atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into a form of nitrogen that plants can grow. But instead of that, what we do is we use huge amounts of energy and heat, pressure and heat, in a thing called the Haber-Bosch process that was created during the war to create nitrogen for bombs. We use that process there, so we're using a lot of energy to do it, and it has to be water soluble, although by now I should think they've sussed out that they don't want it completely soluble, because what happens when it was soluble was, I think they were getting something like 8% of the nitrogen in uptake. The rest of it was ended up in our ditches and drains and in our locks and everything, and that's why, you know, one of the reasons you can't drink water from the land anymore in Ireland. You know, who would have thought that would have happened in Ireland? You know, in fact, one of the main reason for coming here was European companies were buying baby products for baby food in Ireland because it was the cleanest place from heavy metals and whatever in Ireland. So, but that never took off. It never. That opportunity to turn Ireland into this clean green machine, it just never happened. If we don't have the ability to grow things because they don't have the genetic diversity in them, where do we get the genetic diversity from? Well, it's still out there. They reckon the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations reckoned by the year 2000 we'd lost over 90% of all of the food crops that we had before. So that was 90% of all the thousands of different types of carrots and beetroots and cabbages and kales and everything that there was to grow isn't there anymore. But I really think the main reason for that is us. We don't do it any longer. We're not involved in it. It's someone else's business, along with energy and houses and all sorts of other things, you know. We offset these things to have the little world that we want in between our ears. But meanwhile, playing in the background are these other big things, because if we all started saving seeds and crossing and breeding seeds for our areas, we would build all that biodiversity back up again. Also, it's run by 4 companies, run 50% of the world's seeds. So you can really cut the world into 2 bits. One bit is the Western world and our dependency upon everything. And the other is still in third world, in Asia and places where, you know, people still grow food to eat. It's not being grown to sell. Okay, the excess you can sell off to get the little bits you want. Maybe like we were 30 years ago here, and it was looked upon as poverty and everything. But there's a bigger poverty happening, and that is nutritional poverty, and that happens because of the type of food that we're eating. We can't tell any longer whether the food that we're eating has the nutrition that we need, because it's swamped with flavorings, which happened in the 50s, and then salt and fats that they know that we respond to as a being, as an animal. Of all of the different types of foods that we consume, and then from there, once the guys are kind of up on, you know, the different families that we use and how to save seed and looking at inbreeding and outbreeding, once we've done that, we can then start working on becoming breeders, plant breeders, and create things like we did down on the farm. You know, we created the clock onion. That's a landrace onion that has about between 8 and 12 different varieties of onions in it. And it was just selected for diversity because, you know, I don't have a laboratory. I can't look down into the DNA, but I can use phenomenology. I can use my eyes and my nose and my mouth and my fingers to see for characteristics that I know are hidden in there. So we had the clock onion. We have a clock bean, which was a fava bean, that must have been about 6 to 8 varieties in it. We had a courgette, which was the same. And all it is when you're growing, I know the farm, you have periods when things get really intense, and that happens to be around one of the times when you should be kind of saving seeds. But when you're growing that much, you get to look at a lot of different plants of the same variety. So you get to see whether there's diversity within a crop. Now, the thing that the commercial growers are on about is a bit like the angle of a banana. The Boris Johnson thing where he said the EU was banning bananas because the angle of the banana was too acute or something. That's got nothing to do with the flavor of the banana. It's still a banana kind of thing. So what we have to do, I think, is to look at things that grow well here. If they don't grow well here, to look around the world to other places. Like I look up to Washington State and Oregon a lot, to get seeds from them that they've been growing there. And okay, we're not exactly the same, but we do get those kind of wet periods, cold wet periods. They stop being farmer varieties, which means someone else is producing them seeds and we're buying them as farmers. They become peasant seeds where we have an onion that's the clock onion. That's the onion we grow. We like that onion. It does what we need. And so, because the basis of agroecology is based on peasant seeds, and we're not there. The rest of the world that isn't obsessed with all the technology that we've been supplied with through the ability to use fossil fuels. They've been doing it. They've come under other attacks, which is like copyright. And then in the States, there was a guy called, a scientist called Chakraborty. He reckoned that he came up with a bacteria that would eat oil. And so they all went, oh, great, that's going to solve all our oil spills. And so they gave him a license, and it was the first license on a living thing. And from that, what's been brought in is copyright on plants. How can you copyright a new lettuce? Did you just make lettuce out of nothing? Why aren't you paying the person who made that lettuce copyright? We have a collective ownership of seeds. They belong to all of us, all over the planet. They belong to us, the citizens. They also belong to the multinationals as well, because they're humans. Well, they have the right to call themselves a human, the multinationals. But the thing is, they can do what they want with it, because at the end of the day, if we don't buy it, they ain't going to do it. The situation at the moment is that people are panicking because of shortages of food, shortages of energy. Everything goes out of the window. GM. But that was one of Boris Johnson's things of the whole reason for Brexit, was so that they could release GM. It's going to be hideous for them because nobody's going to want to buy the stuff. Because we've now moved into a different period. Before, what was happening was you had like the peasants who had their own knowledge and their own science, really, because that's all. Science is just a Latin word for knowledge. So peasants had their knowledge, their ability to know how to do things. We don't have that anymore, really. Like talking to Joe about baking bread, it's a living thing, it's not a dead thing. So like he has to use all of his skill when he's mixing different flours and things together to make the thing rise and come to life. That's what's happened to us a lot. There's a lot of people in our world who eat dead food. It's put into a microwave or an oven, and that's because we're running, because we've been told to run, because you're only worthy if you've got more money than everyone else. It's kind of taken us away from what we should really be doing, is always looking at the future. If we go back, our ancestors looked to the future. If you look at tribal people around the planet, they look for the future. They look for their children and everything. So that's what we should be investing in, looking in, is we're here now in this time, can we make it better? You know, just imagine if whoever owned this land, the Bakers or whatever, 50 years ago said they were going to put in hedgerows of cherries and plums and apples, and do you know what I mean? That's what we need. We don't need to wait for somebody to give us money to do it, because we'll be waiting until the expert turns up, and he'll be the one who's getting paid in his pink shirt, you know? So this is the whole thing of where we're on the edge at the moment, which is food security. We don't have food security in Ireland. Remember there used to be a thing called the famine? Yeah, that's a lack of food security, which can also be exasperated by political means to wipe people off of a land. But that was a lack of food security. And they say, I don't know how real it is, that they had more food in Ireland when the famine was going on than we have today. It's just that it was being exported. And then they imported maize from the States, and the poor people here didn't know how to eat maize, or, you know, it was something that was culturally different. And this is the struggle that Ireland has, caught within these colonial boundaries that has been imposed upon it for so long that they become normality, you know? And that's what I believe happened and is happening. It's a colonial mindset. The whole thing of, you know, you have to be a successful farmer, so you get rid of all of those things and you specialize in this one thing here. Like, there's loads of specialized farmers around here, and they are cacking it now, like, you know, because nitrogen's gone up from 300 euros a ton or whatever to over 1,000 euros a ton, if you can get it. If you can get it. So it's ripe for that time of regenerative agriculture to take over. I was just saying to somebody, we dumped that thing sustainable ages ago. It's because there's nothing to sustain. It's really run down. The whole place is run down. We had Dr. Christine Jones over from Australia, and she's a soil specialist, and she was appalled at the state of the place when she traveled around the country. People took her around, because you can look out in the fields when there's been any rain and you can see the water laying on the fields. What that means is that's anaerobic land. It's compacted, and plants, most plants, need air for the interaction that they have in the soil with microorganisms and everything. So our industrial system is basically destroying the land that we've got. And that was grand, where we could just keep throwing the bags of that cheap stuff. White, you know, used to see half bags of it thrown in hedges and things, you know, because they got to the end of it and had that bit left and didn't want it. Now you can't get your fingers on it. So that is the thing that is going to set us up again for another food security problem in the country. You know, the minister came out, the Department of Agriculture Minister, Charlie McConaughey or whatever it is, came out and said to the farmers, oh, you know, if you did a couple of acres or hectares of tillage, then, and there's all the farmers going, I'm not a tillage farmer. No, you're a farmer. Yeah, but I'm not a tillage farmer. I'm a dairy farmer. I don't know how to do tillage or whatever. It's, yeah, well, you plough the land and you till it, and then you put seeds in it and it grows and you harvest it. In the second emergency in World War II, 300 farmers were prosecuted in Ireland for not growing grains. And again, it goes to colonialism, not the Brits this time, but a global colonialism. So basically, we're the dairy and cow producer of China, different countries like that. And these you know, each one of these types of farming, they're quite intrusive and toxic on the land. So it's great when you're making your profits, but you're also ending up with loads of slurry. You know, like they just put a new slurry thing on the farm down the back there last year. So they expand the amount of slurry. Because they don't grow any food for their animals. They grow the pastures, which they're now starting to cop on, because Chagas is telling people, oh, you can have multi-sward and you can actually get more out of your... We've known this for 40 years, like, you know, this isn't anything new. But the feed that that the farmers, most suckler farmers and dairy farmers, it's either, it can come in from, there's I think there was 2 ships a day going into Liverpool docks, where there's a special dock for the soya that's coming from Brazil. Then that goes through a process which strips everything out of it that can be taken out of it, and the stuff that's left is for animal feed. So they're not going to get it over here because the Brits are going to be using that. So a lot of the stuff that's coming through, it can be banana skins, orange skins, you know, they all have a calorific value somewhere, and these are all dried and minced and made into preparatory foodstuffs. But there's no food security in that either, because it's coming from outside of the country. We don't grow oranges here, I don't think, or bananas, however bent they are. I don't think we grow them here. So, you know, you're looking at an agricultural system that's based on finance, but it's not based on the needs of the people within the country other than their financial needs, and that ain't ever been met. You know, farmers are, that's another one of the things in food sovereignty. You have to respect your growers, your producers. And it makes sense to me, really. It's like, why would you go to a restaurant and abuse the chef on your way in? You know? Just asking for the chef to spit in your soup. Yeah, so it's the same to me here, like, you know. If you go for the cheapest food all the time, so much so that you affect the lifestyle of the farmer that's trying to grow the food, he then puts pressure on the land. So he'll do shortcuts. So the quality of your food won't be as good as it should be. So even that, we can't, like I was saying about the flavorings and the salt and fats, it's hard for us to make choices about, you know, yeah, that tastes really fulfilling and kind of, you know, the stuff I should be eating. But we can overcome that, and we can overcome that with our breeding as well, because we can use refractometers. We can look at soluble sugars and minerals and things, and then we can see the difference in varieties, as some varieties have the genetic ability to make more vitamins, say, or more nutrients. So with more to gain from growing our own seeds, socially as well as nutritionally, you know, because it's not gonna, it can't go on the way it is. You know, everything goes well, and then it doesn't go too well, and then we need to do something different, a bit like oil and whatever. So that's the whole thing of seed security. We actually made a food proclamation several years ago, and they went up and they pasted it onto the outside the GPO. And you can go online, you can see, you can look at Ireland's food proclamation. When a group of us all came together in Westport, and we kind of did a deep think into what it is that we wanted as, you know, our food sovereignty. And so it's food is for the people. And we need food justice as well, so that the richest people aren't getting the best food, unless eventually we do run out of food, because they'll be the healthiest to eat. But apart from that, Talib Bio are members of La Via Campesina, which is the biggest, it's the Peasants' March. We're the biggest farming union on the planet, and we have a seat on the UN. So, you know, this all came about because of the WTO, especially in places in Mexico, in places with the Chiapas in Mexico. So, yeah, the producers need to have a living, which makes sense, really. You know, I think the individuality that's been foisted on us is we look at ourselves and we don't realise that, you know, Joe and Julia are my bakers, that's where I get my bread from, and your man down the road is the mechanic for my car. You know, we need each other, but we need each other in a more healthy association, where we're connected together. That's what community is. Community is a group of people connected together, not a group of individuals. That's the antisocial social club. Right, to repeal laws as well, just like what happened in India. You know, the farmers were up in arms in India because they tried a quick one on them. And so eventually they stuck at it, and they fought at it, and they were beaten black and blue by the police there. But they have the right to take it back, and they did. They took back the law that they tried to do. You know, we're a bit ahead of the posse with these things, but we have to keep this in our mind's eye. You know, we all need to eat, and we should be eating the best food, which keeps us the healthiest. And then decisions being made locally as well. Again, that sovereignty thing is about decisions that we make. You know, as citizens of the Republic, we make decisions about what kind of food that we want to eat. And then building knowledge and skills. We think that if we start growing wheat in the country for making bread, everything's going to be great. We're going to have loads of wheat. But like your man, the Keenan from, that said, like in Denmark, they have small, you know, towns like this. They would have a place where there's a mill and all of these different things, and the skills are still there as well. We don't have those skills here anymore. The amount of mills that are in Ireland that are all ruined now, like Woods Mill over near Shinrone, you know, they were everywhere because we grew and ground our own flowers. Again, see, these are things where whiskey just doesn't come from the river. You know, whiskey comes from the grains that are grown. So again, you're connected into the land. And that's what most of my life, my head's been blown away because I just want to talk about food, but every time I talk about food, I end up in politics and economics and, you know, industrialization and things, because it's connected. We're connected through food into everything. You know, everything, every organism lives in an ecosystem. And you're only as well as your ecosystem. We've got some really crappy ecosystems. Do you know what I mean? We can do better. We can make systems, because it's the complexity of an ecosystem. That's where the biodiversity comes in. So biodiversity within our food crops, biodiversity within our wild crops. You know, most of the people who subsistence farmers in the world, they still, a proportion of their food doesn't come from them. It comes from the wild. You know, they would still forage and get things, and like everybody goes mad for the garlic in springtime here, the wild garlic. We have very little of that knowledge anymore, you know, as to introduce it into our food. So we have to create ecosystems that are healthier than they are. You need other plants in there, plants that are going to bring in insects, because some of your plants need pollinating to produce the fruit, you know, to bring in birds, because I like to hear birds sing. You know, that's my experience has got something to do with it as well. You know, biomimicry has really rocketed in the sciences in the last 10 years. And basically that's what we do. If we can pay attention, that's how we got here, is our power of observation. You know, we pay attention to things, we can select things, we can create things. These throw up more ideas, and then, you know, so what I always say, and what was said to me when I was in California in farming, is see what you're looking at. Because we don't, as a species, we don't see it. We kind of go over it and look at something else, you know, until the sparkly comes in and we pay it money. Oh no, that's the video. The whole situation with the climate change that we're having, that's what told us, you know. I mean, one of the worst things is that the farmers feel guilty for the way they farm, and they shouldn't be guilty authorities like Chagas in the way that they should grow, the fertilizers they should use, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that they should use. So it's, you know, the government and Chagas need to take some responsibility from that as well. And then we need, you know, if you've got a 100-acre farm now in Ireland, that's not farming. That's not enough land to have a farm, 100 acres. Jesus, how many operations could we have on 100 acres? You know, we could have loads of things going on. And so that's why we have to draw farmers in as well, to the fact that they need to open up their farms. They need more people working on the farms. Anyway, we've been saying this for decades now. It started off back in the 70s when in East Clare we started to notice farmer suicides. You know, there was a lot of suicides going on in farming because they don't see anybody. They, you know, they're in a cab and they're going up and down the field or whatever, or, you know, they go out to feed the animals, and a bit like how Clive was hit by the bull. You know, there's nobody on the land any longer. We're all stuffed into little rooms, watching little screens about people watching in rooms, watching little screens. You know, it's just, we're living in this other world. It's like I want to put my head through the screen to see what the world is like in there. But this world is just as stunning and beautiful and amazing, and there's always something. That's one of the things they say about nature. That's why you should go out walking every day and seeing nature, because there'll always be something. Nothing ever happens. Nothing doesn't happen in nature, because it's alive and it's living. And the more life we bring, life attracts life. So we get more life in. Okay, we might have problems with foxes and rats, but it's all part of life, being attracted towards life. You know, in Ireland especially, we don't want to go back to the old ways. All we can do is go forward. We can stop the purity. We can start allowing this promiscuous pollination of varieties, how nature wants its gene flow flowing through our crops. That's where we need to get back to. Whether you just grow 10 peas in your garden and save some of those seeds and then offer them around to other people in your community, it's a start, you know. Yeah. So that's the start. Thank you.